All right, and welcome back to another episode of Who's Lifting Today. We are going to be talking about rest. I've been getting a lot of questions on should I take rest days? How many rest days? Can I do cardio on rest days? There's been a lot of questions on what that looks like in a strength training program. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And this conversation is not talked about enough. And I think the reason that we don't talk about it enough is because in general, things like rest days or not working out or listening to your body just doesn't make for very good content online. It's a lot more riveting to see, like an athlete like training really hard and sweating really hard, or putting up content that's about like how to train as hard as possible, or just like training in general. But we don't really talk about like the other side, which is rest, because just watching someone like take a rest day is just like, it's not very good content. It's not very interesting to watch. It's not very like, oh my God, look at this athlete not go to the gym, as kind of an example. So, but we're going to talk about it today, and we're going to talk about like the importance of it, because I think we don't talk about it enough. And because of that, there's a lot of misconceptions about what rest looks like in a strength training journey, as well as, what should you do? How much rest should you take? And we're going to kind of talk about the different factors that apply to this. And, you can kind of figure out, generally speaking, how much rest you should be getting. But yeah, let's talk about it. So why do we need rest? I think that's like an important thing to talk about as well. So when you're training, it is important to understand that training on its own is not what makes you stronger. You become stronger recovering from the gym. So in the gym, you work out, you do squats, pull-ups, whatever you do. You fatigue the muscle, and it is recovering from that fatigue is where you become stronger. So while it's like less interesting to watch, the time that you spend not in the gym is actually the time that you were spending recovering from the workout and actually becoming stronger. So that's like an important thing to understand. And this is why rest days matter. And this is why taking the rest that you need like genuinely is important, because it is part of the process. And that is why there should be no guilt with taking rest or rest days, because it is essential to the strength training process. And if you don't have enough rest, it's actually going to affect your training. And I think like that's like something that is like super important to understand, is that when you're taking a rest day, it's not only you're not doing anything bad, you're actually doing something that's like good for your training. So just wanted to clear that up, that there's no guilt in taking rest days. And I wanted to give kind of an example in my own training for this to make sense. So I recently added another training day to my schedule, as well as an extra squatting day. So I went from 2 days a week squatting to 3 days a week. And I think I'm going to stop doing that. And the reason is because I was unable to recover for that third squat training day. Is that 2 days? I've done 2 days a week squatting for quite a while now. My body can recover from it. It's totally fine. For this third day, what I was finding is that I could train and I could get stronger, but the squats weren't feeling good. I didn't feel recovered from the training. And even though my idea was like, okay, well, I should squat more frequently, because then I'll get closer, my squat goal will happen faster. Ended up being not the right choice for me, because I just was unable to recover from 3 training sessions a week that were like leg dominant. Upper body was fine. We're going to talk about that and why that is different. But for squatting specifically, like it just isn't the right call for me. And that's why I'm going to be switching back to 2 days a week, because that just happens to work a lot better for me and my rest. And we're going to kind of talk about how much rest do you need, because there are different factors that exist there that is going to dictate what your training schedule is going to look like. And also we're going to talk about like when you should break the rules, because while we're going to talk about the theoretical examples, there are times where those examples are not going to make sense. So let's talk about it. How much rest do you need? So the first thing that I would say is how hard you work out and how often you work out are going to be big factors, as an example. So if you're training 2 days a week, that's 5 rest days. You're probably pretty well rested, assuming that you're not, doing both of them back to back and both of the training days are really hard. you are probably going to be fine. 3 to 4 days a week seems to be a good ratio for most people, where you can train and you still have, if you're training 3 to 4 days a week, that means 3 to 4 days of rest days. And so you have a pretty good ratio there, and you have enough rest in relation to how much training that you're doing. 5 days a week can work. What I would say about that is that you probably need some workouts that are going to be a little easy, almost on purpose. And you're going to be very careful about how you schedule your workouts, because 5 days a week means you only have 2 days of rest. So you're going to have to be careful on, like, okay, if I did legs on Monday, I'm going to have to make sure my next leg day isn't until Thursday. Maybe the next one's not till Saturday, and Saturday might be an iffy leg day. Maybe you have 5 days a week, but 3 days of those are upper body exclusively, and 2 of those are lower body. And the reason that you might do that split is because larger muscle groups require more rest than smaller muscle groups. And for almost everybody, smaller muscle groups are going to be upper body, and larger muscle groups are going to be lower body. And also that the weights that you work with. So like your squatting and deadlifting numbers are probably going to be heavier than your shoulder and arm numbers, almost always, unless you like do a ton of upper body and you don't do a lot of lower body, as kind of an example. So size of muscle groups and how much weight you're using is going to be a big factor. And so if you are training 4 days a week, 5 days a week, you also want to make sure that the larger muscle groups are still getting the appropriate amount of rest. So if you train 4 days a week and you train legs on Monday, you probably want to wait until like Thursday and even potentially Friday until that second leg day, depending on how hard your leg days are and how heavy you are going. And those are going to be like big factors onto rest. Other things that are going to be factors are your life outside of the gym, because your body is not like, okay, this is stress from the gym and this is stress from my life. Like those are the same to your body. So if you have like a high labor job that is like very physically active, that's going to affect your rest time, and you're going to need more rest time between training sessions. Or if in general, there's even cases where like if you're very, very stressed, this can affect how much rest you need, as an example. So if you're not managing stress well, if you're not, we can talk about nutrition a little bit there, where like nutrition also affects recovery time. So depending on what you've had for food, could affect how many rest days that you need. Those are all going to be factors that might increase the amount of rest days that you're going to need between training different muscle groups, as kind of an example. And we're also going to have to talk about like self-regulation. So there are going to be times that you need more rest days, or you need maybe less rest days. Maybe you're actually ready to go early. But we're going to talk about if you need more rest days, where things have happened. So you're going to need maybe an extra rest day, and that's fine. You don't need to stay totally structured in this. You should have some structure, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, but that you should, really listen to your body. If you've had those 2 rest days for your legs, but you still feel exhausted, that might be a case where maybe we train lighter this day, or maybe we wait 1 more day so that we can train the amount of rest that we're looking for. So those are going to be big factors as well, and really like listening to your body. How tired do I feel for this workout? If the weights feel too heavy, I should give myself the ability to decrease the amount of weight. So those are going to be big factors as well. And you're going to want to stay pretty structured. So that's like something that's like super important. But with flexibility. What I mean by that is that, like, let's say you train 3 days a week and you want enough rest between workouts. So you're going to train Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Life happens for some reason. Monday didn't work out, or Wednesday didn't work out, and that's fine. You might have one of your workouts be Saturday instead. So have the flexibility. If you don't train exactly Monday, Wednesday, Friday, that is okay and not your fault. But you want to make sure that you're giving yourself the appropriate rest that you need, and also having some flexibility so that if you miss your Wednesday workout, you don't just give up or not get all your workouts in, or whatever it might be. And there are going to be times that you'll skip workouts just because you're like tired. Like sometimes people need what's known as like a deload. There's different thoughts on how often your deloads should be, but that's going to be something that is a big factor as well, which is you on purpose decrease the amount of work that you're doing to give yourself extra rest. Because if you've been training 4 days a week, let's say like 8 weeks in a row, really solidly, but like hard training, you might just need a week that is easier on purpose just for that recovery. So that's going to be a big factor as well. Now, how do we add other exercises into this? Because some of you don't just strength train, you also do running or you do other sports, and that's totally fine. If it's a cardio-based activity, you can combine them together, but understanding that like if you do cardio first, it probably means that your strength training is going to be a little bit harder. And if you do strength training first, it probably means that your cardio is going to be a little bit harder. Whatever you do second is going to be harder, essentially. If you can plan it out, try and have your cardio and your strength training on separate days. But if that's not how it works for you, that's totally fine. But just know that if you combine them, that there's going to be a little bit of extra stress and that you might need more rest, more sleep, whatever it might be. But you can do both. And if your cardio is like a mild to medium level of intensity, you're probably fine to combine them. The only time it gets really complicated is when you are both like a strength training person as well as like running marathons or something that's like very long cardio. That's when things get like more complicated, but for the most part, you can definitely do both and there's like no issues. So that's something that's going to be like important, is that you can do both. I don't want you to think that you can't, that you have to choose one or the other. I do both cardio and strength training. A lot of the women that I work with also do cardio and strength training. So I don't want you to feel like you can't do that, as an example. So this was my talk about rest. I think this is like really important to talk about because there's a lot of guilt around rest. There's a lot of like, like taking a rest day, you feel bad for it. Maybe you should be in the gym training harder, but I promise you it is part of the process and it is important to take rest days. So don't be afraid to take rest days. They are valuable. They are important. And I hope this was helpful and brought like a new perspective on rest days. And if you still have more questions about how much rest you should take, because we talked about a lot of different factors here, send me a message. Absolutely. Instagram at Training Strong Women. Email is strongwithmark@gmail.com. You can absolutely like ask me more questions. Let me know how, if you're not sure if you're taking enough rest, and we can definitely like talk about it and go through it. But thanks for listening to another episode of Thanks for listening to another episode of Who's Lifting Today.